circles that can be made where we address both of them at the same time, where we reduce carbon and save money. If so, how do we do that? So that's the small challenge we've set ourselves today. So Keith, we will hear from Keith on that subject. And then on my left is Tanya Steele, who we've upgraded. I think you saw the program. Originally we had a lesser entity from WWF. We said no, we can't have dumplings. We're not accepting that. We must have the best. And so we have the CEO of WWF as well. So you'll hear from Tanya and Keith, and I think hopefully during that time we'll get Seema in the room as well. So if there's anybody I haven't offended yet, don't worry, I'll get to you later on. With that, I will hand over to Keith Anderson. Keith.
Thank you, James. Welcome to everybody. So we'll be a bit unusual. We'll just answer your question up front. Is there a trade-off? No, there shouldn't be any trade-off at all. The two things are not mutually exclusive, and we think actually tackling both can be done together. Why do I say that? Okay, so it has been some time since November in Glasgow, and we had the whole of the world turn up to talk about climate change. And we had COP26 in Glasgow, and it does seem like a long time ago, but it isn't really. But that was a great moment in time, and I think it really focused the world's attention on how to get to net zero. I think it was a great boost for the whole of the UK in looking at how we get to net zero. And I still think that determination and those aims and goals exist right across the political spectrum in the UK. I just think people are talking about them in a different context just now. And the emergency we have now is the energy crisis and the cost of energy at this point in time, and how do we tackle it? And the answers are actually very, very similar to how do you tackle climate change. It's a lot of it is about how do we wean ourselves off fossil fuels, and how do we do it with speed, and how do we tackle it and get faster and get better at doing it. And we'll bring down the cost, we'll improve our energy security, we'll improve our energy reliability, and we will reverse some of the worst impacts of climate change, and that's what we need to be doing. As a company, we made the decision to change quite a long time ago. We shut down our coal plants. In fact, we didn't just shut them down, we decided to blow them up as well, just to make sure nobody else could ever use them in the future. We got rid of gas, and we're a 100% renewable generating company. We also have over 4 million customers, so we are phenomenally well aware of the issues of the cost of energy and the crisis and how it's affecting individuals, and also how it's affecting businesses. We've been working incredibly hard along with others in the industry over the last 6, 9, 12 months to look at how do we tackle some of those immediate issues around the cost of energy. The government have brought in a price guarantee scheme, which I think is a good step forward. It helps significantly. However, what I would say is we are still faced with a winter where people will be paying twice the amount they used to pay for gas and electricity. So it by no means deals with the issue in terms of the cost and the impact of the cost. There's a lot more that needs to be done from the industry, from support groups, and with the government on how we protect particularly vulnerable people across this winter. What else does the price guarantee do? What the price guarantee really does is it buys us 2 years. It buys us 2 years to start fixing some of the fundamental problems that underlie the sector. What are those issues? Number one is how do we rapidly increase the rate of build-out of renewables and get ourselves from the reliance on gas in particular. So we should be going on a massive investment program in onshore wind, solar, offshore wind. To do that, we need to massively and radically change the timeline of the planning system, the regulatory processes, and the environmental system as well. We need speed because we need to do this incredibly quickly. What else do we need to do? We need to look at how do we stop the price of gas infecting the price of electricity, because that's the way the wholesale market is structured at this point in time. And that's just predominantly because the current design of the market was made when we were predominantly generating electricity through coal and gas. And we need to fix and change that. There are medium to long-term solutions for that, and there are some short-term solutions and fixes as well. Next one is we need to go on a monumental investment on energy efficiency, because it still holds true, and it has always held true. The best way to cut carbon and the best way to save costs is don't use it in the first place. And so the more efficient we are in terms of particularly our housing stock in the UK, the better we will be at tackling all of these issues. And I think maybe what's been a little bit disappointing, if you like, over the last year is the lack of focus on energy efficiency. It has almost fallen off the agenda in an awful lot of meetings, and we need to get it back at the top of the agenda. And then finally, we should also look at a huge wave of investment in heat pumps. We need to stop burning gas in people's houses to heat those homes. And that is predominantly a UK issue. We have about, I think it's 85% of all homes in this country heated by burning gas, and we need to stop doing that. And so again, we need a big wave of investment to drive that forward, and that will also help to bring down the costs and reduce the amount of use of gas. So, come back to my original answer. If you look at all of those things we need to do to tackle the energy emergency, they match 100% of all of the things we need to do to tackle climate emergency in this country. So there is no trade-off. There is absolutely no need for a trade-off at all. And the positive in all of it is we have all of the tools to do it. We have all of the technology to do it. It's just about speed and the will to deliver. And that's what we need to make sure we fix. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Before I go to Tanya, I'm going to try and do my living, do my job as a challenging independent chair, despite the fact I agree with everything you've said. Your contention is there's no trade-off here, that we can do both. We can cut cost of living and cut carbon. But isn't there a time frame challenge? Because particularly on your list of 4 items, the last two particularly, energy efficiency, lagging more lofts, heat pumps, they have an upfront cost, don't they? And so there may not be a long-term trade-off. There is a short-term trade-off in that the money I spend, we collectively spend, were we to spend it on more lagging and more heat pumps today, is money that we cannot spend on something else today. And that is the trade-off. There is a challenge for all of us who believe. I imagine most people in the room largely agree with most things you said. I agree. That is the challenge we have to address, isn't it? There are upfront costs, and if we, unless we accept our upfront costs, to talk about how to meet those, you better crystallise the gains from that spending up front, then we'll struggle to make this case.
So yes, look, there are upfront costs. There are huge amounts of money required to be invested in the grid system. There are huge billions and billions of pounds required to be invested in renewables, billions of pounds in heat pumps, and several hundred million, if not billions of pounds in energy efficiency. But we have relatively good mechanisms in this country to spread the cost of that over a long period of time. So, for example, all of the billions of pounds that need to go into the grid system to allow us to connect to renewables, to allow us to change the way the system works, to allow us to decarbonise heat and transport, we will spread that over 40 years through a regulatory process. And therefore, actually, the impact today on our bill is absolutely minimised, and it's manageable and controllable. You also look at, you could do the same or a similar thing with energy efficiency measures. You can spread the cost or spread the burden of that. You can use a mixture of tax, spend to help incentivize energy efficiency. You can do some of it through bills as well, and you can spread the cost. But energy efficiency also has an immediate upside and impact on any individual as well. By installing the loft insulation, the cavity wall insulation, and a whole lot of other additional measures, you automatically, very, very quickly reduce the amount of energy that a home uses and therefore bring the cost back down. And in essence, what you're doing for what should be roughly the same price, you're making the home comfortable to live in, as opposed to increasing the cost. So I don't think they're perfectly valid challenges, but I don't think they're insurmountable. And I don't think, again, they should deviate away from us doing any of those things.
I suspect from things here we might have more discussion about the merits of government borrowing, what is best used for in current political context. But we'll leave the politics to see when we get it. Thank you, Keith. Tanya Steele, the WWF perspective on this. What's your answer to our essay question about trade-offs?
In terms of a tale of two cities, I think ultimately we would say, yes, there are trade-offs, but ultimately this is a course that we have to take. I mean, the cost of living crisis, we know, is essentially driven by the cost or the prices of fossil fuels, particularly in our energy system, in our transport, but also in our agriculture. And the WWF view, of course, like potentially I would say many in this room, is getting our reliance down on fossil fuels will actually start to drive out some of these costs for the future. And I think our concern that this isn't the time for backward steps. We've seen a series of them recently, and it felt like a world away from many of the commitments being made at COP26, the climate conference hosted by the UK. And we're effectively a nation that has been lauded globally for powering past coal. I know Keith joked about blowing up even some of the power stations. Actually now to power past both oil and gas. And how do we actually start to do that? Because we know that the prices for oil and gas are set globally. So regardless of what we do to open up new oil fields or open up new gas pipeline opportunities, it is an absolute drop in the ocean when we consider it to the total global energy market. So I think really our challenge is thinking about how we do that and also thinking about the time frames. We know by stepping back and investing in renewables, they generally have much shorter time frames in terms of installing onshore wind. Again, perhaps I'll let Keith comment on that, versus opening up a new oil well or getting that to capacity for the future. So yes, there is undoubtedly a time hump, as it were, but we're very concerned about kind of kicking the can down the road on net zero. We can make the kind of renewable decisions that we need to now, whether it's on solar, whether it's on renewables, on wind, or on or offshore, which I know we heard today is 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels. Nobody's talking about tidal power either. We have a huge tidal range as a nation. We are a very wet and windy nation, so there are incredible opportunities. But ultimately, while there are costs, and I know Seema will rightly highlight what some of those costs are, one of the recent pieces of work carried out by the London School of Economics was in GDP terms, the cost of net zero is probably around about 2%. If we consider the benefits from a GDP perspective, it is 4%. So it is something that will ultimately deliver an economic return. But there are some missed opportunities, and there's some opportunities that we can take now, certainly in terms of home insulation. We're currently heating our streets. We really need to make that investment, and then we know that investment can also support jobs now, as well as bring in energy price reductions and energy reductions in terms of the price of the bill at home too. As an NGO, WWF is part of a coalition called Warm This Winter, where we're also working with other environmental organisations and leading environmental groups, where I guess we're looking to do a number of things, calling for some of the immediate interventions for some of the most hard-pressed homes and families. What is in place so they are not choosing between heating and eating? Importantly, how can we increase renewables and actually start to power past coal, oil and gas, and start to make the investment in insulating our homes. But just one last point I think I'd like to make in terms of the overall cost of living crisis is food. Energy is really the headline at the moment in terms of what many people are feeling in their homes, but we have all seen food prices increase. Some of that was initially some of the post-pandemic and some of the supply chain issues. But equally, we know that farmers really are struggling in this regard. They're reliant on fossil fuels and the increased prices in terms of the fuel to drive their tractors, to drive the processing plants, but also in terms of other inputs like fertilizers as well. So when we look at the food system, we're also considering what does that mean for net zero? And we know that the nature of our food and agriculture system is driving 12% of emissions for the UK right now. So over 1 in 10 of every single emission is driven by our food and agriculture system. So if we're serious about net zero and we're serious about the energy and the food crisis as part of overall cost of living, we need a holistic approach to how we actually support our food system and how we actually start to incentivise and enable farmers and production facilities to actually start to move to a net zero future as well. I'll stop there and perhaps let's see comments.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much, and welcome to Seema Malhotra from the Shadow Business Team. Seema, we've just heard the answers from Keith and Tanya to our essay question for the day, which is there a trade-off between addressing the cost of living crisis and addressing the climate crisis? Their answers are both no, there is not a trade-off because it is possible to do both. Through a range of interventions. I won't summarise because you're probably pretty familiar with them. That's the background. We're delighted to have you here. Very keen to get thoughts from you about the Labour answer to that question. Is there a trade-off? And if not, how could and should you take action to address both those crises simultaneously?
Great. Well, look, thank you very much, James. Look, it's a pleasure to join you, and I'm very sorry for being a few minutes late with this fringe shopping that happens at conference. But look, I'm really pleased to be here, and thanks to Scottish Power as well for supporting this discussion. Look, you probably won't be surprised to hear, James, that there's likely to be consensus on this panel. But I think maybe I'd go a little bit further, not to say that there isn't a trade-off, but more to say that doing one is actually important for the other and necessary for the other. There was some research that came out by the Grantham Research Institute as well earlier this year, and one of the things it noted was that the net zero transition might be around 2% of UK GDP, but the benefit to the UK was likely to be at least double that. And I think this is part of what's really important to frame in this debate, that there is an economic return for how we will, what we do and how we choose to use the transition to a greener economy, what that might mean for households, but also what it's going to mean for reducing energy bills in the long term. Now, these are things that may have seemed like sort of just extras, just sort of convenience things that, net zero was sort of nice to do and we all paid lip service to it. I think there have been some shifts in mindsets, not just because of the cost of living crisis, but because of what we've seen with the floods and the wildfires in the UK. It's only last month that I came back from a week in Greece where an old set of ruins had been closed because of the risk of wildfire, to having 4 wildfires in Feltham and Heston. One which actually reached the back of people's homes, with a whole street, one side of the street, having to be evacuated at midnight, with the fire brigade that sat there for 2 days and putting out any embers where there was the wind taking a little bit of ash over. And so open space, part of that, became a massive risk for people in Feltham and Heston. Now, I could not have imagined that. Wildfires was something I thought happened in California and Australia, right? I mean, and wider, but that's a kind of mindset. It doesn't happen here. But the impact of climate change is happening here, and it's going to continue to happen. The rains may have come for now, but what's going to happen next year? And the cost and the risk for our households is serious. But I think as well that the transition to net zero has really been given an important new lease of life in terms of political argument. It has been the case that the right has wanted to frame this as something that we can sort of do without, because isn't it a bit expensive and don't we have to worry about other more immediate challenges right now? But the cost of energy and how we're having to deal with that is partly because we haven't had a sustainable answer to energy supply and types of energy that we've got, and we haven't really had a proper strategy that's been a serious strategy for what is kind of home produced energy that's sustainable and green. Now we've had steps towards it, but they have been more like a lurch here and a step back there and a fall over there. With the and whether it has been the lack of progress on homes insulation and the other ways in which we've had the solar energy industry sort of see a setback as well. It has meant that we are far less ready for the crisis that we're in. But if you're looking to sustainable reductions in energy supply and cost of energy supply, you can see, even through onshore wind, that within 18 months you could be seeing a difference to a large number of people's energy bills. So there isn't in my view, it's not even so much a talk of a trade-off. It is a case of a necessity to do one in order for the medium and longer term that the other then can happen. And that's why the sort of net zero or sort of clean energy pledge by 2030 that we've been talking about this week is part of, it isn't the whole economic strategy, but it is part of saying, look, if you want to give a message about where we're going as a country that continues to give people the confidence to invest in Britain, you may be shocked to hear that Britain ranks 150th around the world for investment as a percentage of GDP between 2010 and 2019. I mean, we have not given the certainty for investment. And what I've heard over the course of conference last couple of days is that investors are lining up to be able to invest in clean energy supply, but they don't know what the plan is, and therefore they don't take those steps. But look, I just want to just close by saying that it's a false economy and not a solution to say let's get rid of sort of green stuff. I think we need to frame the debate differently. I think we need to be looking at the immediate measures now, which the government is sort of catching up on now. But there's always a sting in the tail with the government on freezing the energy prices and helping people through the immediate cost of living, and businesses too. Frankly, it's an utter relief that they have they've brought in some support with a cliff edge, obviously, in the spring. But we need to frame the debate differently, and it is the reason why we believe very much in working with business to tackle the challenges we're facing now, to make sure that there is a fair deal for consumers at the end of it and fairer markets, but also that we have solutions for the long term, which are dealing with all of our crises: the energy price crisis, the energy security crisis, and the climate crisis.
Thank you very much. Because you just mentioned investment, the investment climate, I'd just like to go back to Keith Anderson, I suppose. And Keith, I don't want to lure you into a part of the conversation at Labour Party conference, but here you are. You're the CEO of a big energy company. You're at the Labour Party conference, and it just puts green growth up in lights here. You must be pretty pleased with, without getting into the party politics there, you must be pretty pleased with the direction of travel of political discourse, to use a terrible word. That this is the future of, this is where politics goes, isn't it?
Yeah, so the UK is looked upon as a good place to invest in terms of net zero. And the fact that the UK put that into legislation has helped. The fact that you look across the political parties and no one is disagreeing with the end game, okay, and the end goal. There's lots of differentials in terms of policies and how you get there, the speed and the trajectory, and which technologies. That's fine, but the end goal, everybody's pretty much agreed on. So from an investor's point of view, that starts to make things look very attractive. You see the amount of money people are willing to invest and come forward with in terms of technologies like onshore wind, solar, offshore wind. Those are very well-established markets, well-established technologies. And the biggest disadvantage the UK has right now is speed. So if I look at the Iberdrola group, it's part of the group I'm part of, the Scottish Power. What dictates how much money from the Iberdrola group comes to the UK isn't rates of return, investor confidence. It's actually speed. And what we're tending to see is the UK is slower at delivery than an awful lot of other countries. That's what we need to tackle. Now, you go around the political parties, and there's lots of people recognising that issue. We heard last week, and some of the announcements last week, the statistic, heard it 101 times before, it takes 7 years to get an onshore wind farm through the planning process, but it only takes 1 year to build it. That equation is all wrong, it's horrible. Okay. Now, everybody agrees we need to do something about it, and that's fine. The how is the difficult bit. And nobody's shown me anything yet about how are you going to change this, because there are some difficult choices that need to be made in doing it. But the UK is a good place to invest. The other thing, just from an investor's point of view, this always gets me out of party politics anyway, which is I don't really care much who's in government from year to year or period to period. I'm investing in a grid system and in wind farms and assets that last 40 years. That covers 10 governments. Which one's important?